talking about the latest proposed changes to your retirement coming out of Washington. Spent the prior segment sort of hitting the highlights on those increasing to required minimum distribution ages, increases to the catch-up contribution limits, increases to auto enrollments in employer-sponsored plans. Now we're going to kind of give you our take on what's really happening as it relates to those changes. So welcome back to Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. Central Florida's longest running radio program, also happen to be one of the top 25 financial planning podcasts on the World Wide Web. We welcome in this segment our listeners over on the Space Coast at 92.7 WMMB. My name is Joel Garris. I'm a certified financial planner and certified financial fiduciary at Nelson Financial Planning, where our team of certified financial fiduciary stands ready this week to help you change your life with a successful and cost-effective financial plan. So we've got all these retirement changes, right? We've got the Secure Act 1, which passed in December of 2019. We've got Secure 2, which unanimously passed the House Ways and Means Committee earlier this summer, and now appears to be slated for passage by the House. Seems likely that that might pass, but again, who knows? The bottom line is it is a proposed piece of legislation. Obviously, we will keep you informed on this program as to when, in fact, it does become law. But here's the thing about the fine print, and it started with the first round of this retirement changes, and it really does continue with this second round. Understand that the fine print in all of these changes is really about the revenue. The folks in Washington are spending money like unbelievably so, and at some point they turn to the revenue side of things, and ultimately you can't just keep borrowing money, at least I don't think you can, and so then you have to look at the revenue side. So what does revenue side mean to the federal government? It means taxes and how you collect them and when. So certainly the first round of major retirement changes that you saw 18 months ago did a big step in that direction when it eliminated the stretch IRA and shortened the period of time that you have to take money out of a retirement account that you inherit. You only got 10 years now. So that means they know that it is going to be a 10-year period of time whereby you wind up having to take the money out and ultimately having to pay taxes on it. Now, here's the curious thing. Why pick 10 years, right? I mean, why not 8? Why not 15? Where did the 10 years come from? Well, if you know anything about the folks in Washington, that's the maximum period of time upon which, when they pass a bill, that's the maximum period of time upon which they can sort of pull in the numbers into the bill when they're trying to justify its cost. So wasn't a random number. It was specifically tied to the period of time upon which the folks in Washington can count that revenue when they're sort of counting what's supposed to be going on with the revenue raise or the revenue increase on any piece of legislation. And so the proposed Secure 2.0, if you will, takes of that all a kind of a step further, but it does so in a little different perspective in terms of drawing the distinction between your traditional approach versus your Roth approach. And just to recap the differences between those approaches for our listeners, the traditional approach is you put the money in, you get a tax deduction today. When you take it out down the road, you wind up having to pay taxes, right? On a Roth approach, it's after-tax money, which means then that's revenue today to the federal government because you don't get a tax deduction for it. But when you take it out down the road, again, outside that 10-year window that they like to look at, then it's tax-free. So if I'm looking to generate more revenue, particularly over the next few years, because I've spent so darn much money over the past few years that I need to do something to stop the craziness, the reality is that they are now looking at more of these catch-up contributions, these additional amounts that you can put in beyond the traditional levels as pushing those into the Roth side of the equation. So a lot of the fine print in here has to deal with sort of the Rothification of your retirement, which means that you don't get a choice if you're making those catch-up contributions to do them on a pre-tax basis. You've got to do them on an after-tax basis, which means that we, the federal government, get the revenue now. See how that all works? Ultimately, that's the piece of the fine print on this legislation that disturbs us a little bit, because it eliminates the option for folks to be able to choose which one may be right for them, all with the background of the fine print of, hey, we need the money now, so we're going to eliminate the ability to do it on a pre-tax basis, because that doesn't generate money now. So watch out for that. The Rothification of your retirement is afoot, particularly with this new piece of legislation. So certainly something you need to be aware of when it comes to that. They're after the money, and they're going to figure out how to get it. So be careful when they start passing wonderful, glorious pieces of legislation that ultimately have great sounding names, but at the core, it gets into your pocketbook. Anyway, speaking of your pocketbook, are you one of the millions of Americans who literally have left money behind in a 401k? Saw a recent study out of the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College, where they estimate that over 24 million forgotten 401k accounts are out. 24 million forgotten, and that's a staggering number, that in total hold over 1.35 trillion of the assets of hardworking Americans. On an annual basis, the numbers are that Americans leave behind about 2.8 million accounts each year. Stop and think about these numbers. There's only about $6.7 trillion in 401k. So we're talking like 15 to 20% of the entire amount that has been saved in these types of accounts. So what's the big deal with that? I mean, the reality is that it's sort of obvious, right? I mean, the first thing about when you leave your employer, right? If you leave your employer, you put all your stuff in a box, you take the pictures of the kids, take the little knickknacks, all that, and then you take that with you. Why would you do the same thing with your money? Lots of times it gets forgotten, particularly if you sign up for email delivery, right? And then if you use the email that is your work email, and now you're no longer at that company, then you no longer have that email, and then everything just gets kind of forgotten. So the reality is that when you leave your employer, you really want to take control of that money. That's obvious, right? The other less obvious issue where it really kind of comes into play and sort of undermines what your potential investments may look like is this notion of the investment allocation ultimately is going to change, and that is going to undermine what your performance might look like. I'm thinking just recently my wife's employer changed their 403b provider, and she had a variety of funds that we had selected in the prior version of that, and then it was going to get pushed over to this new plan, but it wasn't going to be pushed over into specific funds. It was going to be pushed over and mapped into a target date fund. Now, as you know, we're certainly not big fans of those target date funds. We've certainly spent a lot of time on prior podcasts and programs talking a lot about those types of funds and the limitations behind them. The reality is that you've got a situation where a lot of employers will change their plans on a regular basis in an effort to try and reduce costs. That's understandable. But what happens is that ultimately means that you really do lose track of and lose control of exactly how that money is getting invested. So what to do? Well, first of all, don't lose track of it, right? Make sure you are taking the time, taking the opportunity to bring that over with you. And whether that's rolling it over to your current plan, your new plan at your new employer, assuming that they've got a broad range of investment choices. That's fantastic. That's one option you can do. The other option you can do is you can roll it over to an individual retirement account. If there's a Roth piece, then obviously that Roth piece has to go to a Roth IRA. The pre-tax pieces go to an IRA. There's a process there, as with anything, particularly when you're dealing with something that could trigger tax implications. But the bottom line is, don't lose track of it. Don't be part of this 24 million accounts that have been completely forgotten out there. Don't lose track of it. Make sure you take the time to do the right thing with it, roll it over, put it over into something that is going to continue to allow you to at least keep an eye on it and make sure that the investment allocation is where it needs to be. We're going to slide to a break. When we get back from the break, we're going to talk about some of the signs that you need to be thinking of to make sure that your retirement is on track. Coming up next here on Dollars and Cents with Joel Getz.